The crimson line, the void music. Between stars held no mercy, Commander. Elena Vasquez understood this truth as she stood on the bridge of the UNSS. Indomitable, watching the sensor. Displays paint a picture of approaching doom. The Dreadnought's massive frame hummed beneath her boots, a sleeping giant among the scattered remains of humanity's 7th Fleet. Around her vessel, 19 ships limped through space, their hulls scorched and breached, their crews exhausted from 3 weeks of running battles across the Carvec Nebula. Elena was 42 years old, with sharp features hardened by 15 years of deep space warfare. Her dark hair was pulled tight against her skull, and her brown eyes reflected the cold light of tactical displays. She had earned her command through blood and sacrifice, rising from a gunner's position during the first contact war to the captain's chair of humanity's most powerful warship. The Indomitable was more than a ship to her. It was a promise made in steel and fusion fire, a declaration that humanity would never again be caught defenseless among the stars. Bridge crew worked in tense silence. Lieutenant Chin monitored the tactical station, his young face tight with concentration. Chief Engineer Morrison stood near the damage control boards, her weathered hands moving across controls as she fought to keep critical systems operational. Weapons Officer Ramos sat ready at his console, though his ammunition counts had been declining steadily for days. They were professionals, every one of them. But Elena could see the exhaustion in their movements, the weight of endless combat pressing down on shoulders, too tired to carry it much longer. The communication station crackled to life, a familiar voice cut through the static, carrying the crisp authority of high command. Commander Vasquez, this is Admiral Thornton. The Admiral's words were measured, careful, the tone of a man delivering news he wished he did not have to speak. Your current position has been analyzed. Enemy forces are converging on your location in numbers we cannot counter. The Zitharan 3rd Battle Group has been confirmed entering the nebula from galactic north. Their fleet strength is estimated at over 200 vessels. Elena felt her stomach tighten. 200 ships. The Zitharans had committed nearly a quarter of their entire military to hunting down the remnants of the 7th Fleet. Behind the enemy armada lay the Terran colonies of the Outer Reach, 15 worlds holding nearly 8 million human civilians, farmers and teachers and children who had fled Earth seeking new homes among distant suns. The 7th Fleet was all that stood between those colonies and extinction. Admiral Thornton continued, his voice carrying the weight of impossible choices. You are hereby ordered to execute Protocol Sigma 7. All vessels are to break formation and scatter across multiple jump vectors. Individual ships will proceed to rally Point Sanctuary using independent navigation. This is a full retreat. Order, Commander, save what you can. Preserve your crews. We will rebuild and fight another day. Thornton out. The transmission ended. The bridge fell into a silence so complete that Elena could hear the soft whisper of the ventilation systems, the distant hum of the reactor cores buried deep in the Indomitable's armored heart. Protocol Sigma 7 meant abandonment. It meant turning away from the colonies they had sworn to protect. It meant survival purchased with the lives of millions who trusted humanity's military to stand between them and the darkness. Lieutenant Chin turned in his seat, his young face uncertain. Commander, shall I relay the retreat? Order to the fleet. His voice carried a question within the question, a hope that perhaps she would find another way. Some miracle that would make the impossible choice unnecessary. Elena looked at the tactical display. The Zitherans were closing fast, their ships moving in the coordinated swarms that had made them the terror of 3 sectors. The enemy did not value individual life the way humans did. They were a hive species, billions of minds, linked through quantum entanglement, thinking and acting as one vast consciousness. To them, the destruction of human colonies was simply the removal of competing organisms from contested territory. There would be no negotiation, no mercy, no last-minute diplomatic solution. There would only be fire and death in the silence of dead worlds. Behind the fleet, along the trajectory they had been protecting, lay New Harvest. Elena had visited that colony once 3 years ago during a peacetime tour. She remembered walking through fields of golden grain under a pale blue sky, watching children play near irrigation channels while their parents worked the land. The colony's governor had been a woman named Sarah Chen, Lieutenant Chen's older sister, determined administrator who had spent 10 years transforming a barren rock into a thriving agricultural world. 800,000 people called New Harvest home. 800,000 souls who had no warships of their own, no planetary shields, no way to defend themselves against what was coming. Chief Engineer Morrison spoke quietly, her voice carrying the rough wisdom of 30 years in the fleet. Commander, the crew is waiting for your orders. The other ships are already beginning to break formation. We can make the jump in 7 minutes if we start our preparation sequence now. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She saw her father's face, remembered his stories about the evacuation of Earth's outer colonies. During the first contact war, he had been a transport pilot then, one of thousands who had fired refugees away from doomed worlds while warships fought desperate, delaying actions. He had told her about the faces pressed against viewports, the families torn apart by capacity limits, the children crying for parents left behind. He had told her that the worst sound in the universe was not the roar of plasma cannons or the scream of dying ships. It was the silence that came after, when you knew you had abandoned people who trusted you to save them. Her father had drunk himself to death 5 years after the war ended. The guilt had eaten through him like acid through whole plating. Elena had found him in their small apartment on Mars, an empty bottle in his hand and tears frozen on his cheeks, his last words scrolled on paper and shaking. Handwriting had been simple. I should have stayed. Someone should have stayed. Elena opened her eyes. The bridge crew was watching her, waiting for the order that would save their lives and doom millions. She thought about duty and sacrifice, about the oath she had sworn when she accepted her commission. She thought about the children on New Harvest and the promise humanity had made when it scattered across the stars. We protect our own. We stand together. We do not abandon those who cannot defend themselves. The decision crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. It was not a choice born from hope of victory or belief in miraculous salvation. It was simpler than that. Purer, it was the recognition that some things mattered more than survival. Some promises could not be broken, not even to preserve your own life. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear. Blay That retreat order, she turned to face. Her crew seeing their shock there. Confusion, their desperate hope, all. Hands to battle stations, engineering, I want maximum power to engines and forward shields, weapons load everything. We have left, tactical plot me a course. Straight into the heart of that Zithiran fleet, Lieutenant Chen's voice cracked. Slightly. Commander, that's suicide, we can't possibly win against 200 ships. Elena smiled, and there was something fierce and terrible in that expression. Something old and primal that reached back to humanity's ancient past when their ancestors had stood against predators with nothing but sharpened sticks and defying courage. Winning isn't the objective, Lieutenant. We're not retreating because someone needs to buy time for those colonies to evacuate. Someone needs to show the Zithurians that humanity doesn't run, that we'll fight for every inch of space, for every world, for every single life they try to take from us. She walked to the communications console and opened a channel to the fleet. This is Commander Vasquez aboard the Indomitable. I know High Command has ordered us to retreat. I know the odds we face. Any ship that wants to follow that order has my blessing. Save yourselves, save your crews, but the Indomitable is not running. We're going forward. We're going to hurt them. We're going to make them pay for every world they've burned, every colony they've destroyed. We're going to show them what happens when you threaten humanity's children. She paused, letting her words sink in. For those who choose to stay know this. We probably won't survive the next hour, but our deaths will mean something. They'll mean that somewhere behind us, families are getting on evacuation ships. They'll mean that children will never get to live. They'll mean that when the history of this war is written, someone will remember that the 7th Fleet stood its ground when retreat was the only logical choice. The channel went silent. Elena watched the tactical display, watching the small icons representing the 19 damaged ships of her fleet. One by one, the icons began to shift, moving from retreat formation into attack positions. Light cruiser Defiant moved to her port side. The heavy destroyer Thunderchill took position to starboard. Across the display, every ship, every single vessel that had survived the running battles through the nebula was forming up around the Indomitable. Chief Morrison's voice was thick with emotion. All ships reporting battle ready, Commander. The fleet is with you. Elena nodded, her throat tight. She had just condemned them all to death, and they had chosen to follow her anyway. That was humanity's true strength, she thought. Not their weapons or their ships or their tactical brilliance. It was their willingness to stand together, to sacrifice themselves for those who could not fight back, to choose honor over survival when the universe offered them an easy escape. Helm, she said quietly. A head full, take us to war. The Indomitable surged forward, its massive engines flaring to life. Around it, the fleet accelerated, 20 ships against 200. Damaged and depleted but unbowed, they did not retreat, they did not scatter. They charged straight toward the approaching Zitharan armada, and in the darkness between stars, a new kind of light began to shine. It was not the light of fusion reactors or plasma weapons. It was something older and fiercer, the light of beings who had looked at death and chosen defiance. Crimson line had been drawn. Behind it stood everything worth protecting, and the humans would hold that line or die. Trying thunder in the void. Zitharan fleet emerged from the crimson. Clouds of the Carvex nebula like a swarm. Of metallic locusts, their ships moved. In perfect synchronization, hundreds of vessels acting as extensions of a single. Vast intelligence, bioorganic hulls. Pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Communication flowing through quantum. Linked neural networks that span light years to human observers. The Zitharan armada looked less like a military formation and more like a living organism, a predator made of ships and weapons instead of flesh and bone. Aboard the Indomitable, the bridge crew watched the sensor readings climb. 217 enemy vessels, Lieutenant Chin reported, his voice steady despite the impossible numbers. Composition includes 43 Dreadnought-class biohips, 72 heavy cruisers, and the rest are destroyers and support craft. They're forming a standard envelopment pattern. They mean to surround us. Commander Elena Vasquez stood at the center of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back. She had discarded her uniform jacket, revealing the simple black shirt beneath. There was no point in formality now, no need for the trappings of rank and ceremony. What mattered was the next hour, the next minute, the next heartbeat. She studied the tactical display with the focused intensity of a chess master, examining a board, though this was a game where losing meant not just her death but the deaths of everyone who had chosen to follow her. Weapons. Officer Ramos spoke without looking away from his console. Commander, at current range, we can engage with our main rail guns in 4 minutes, missile range in 2. Our ammunition stores are at 37% across the fleet. Once we commit, there won't be much left for a sustained engagement. 37%. Elena absorbed that information. Without visible reaction, they had been fighting for 3 weeks straight, running battles across the nebula as they tried to delay the Zitharan advance. Every ship in her fleet carried scars from a dozen engagements. The Indomitable herself had taken hits that would have crippled lesser vessels. Plasma lance had burned through her port armor plating, venting 3 decks to space before emergency bulkheads sealed the breach. Her point defense grid was operating at 60% efficiency. 2 of her 4 main reactor cores had been shut down for repairs that would never be completed. Chief Engineer Morrison appeared on the communication screen, her face streaked with grease and sweat. She was down in engineering, surrounded by the massive machinery that powered the Dreadnought. Commander, I've rerouted everything we can spare to forward. Shields and engines will burn hot and fast, but I can give you one good char. Straight into their formation. After that, systems will start failing. We're held together with hull patches and prayers at this point. Elena allowed herself a thin smile. Then let's make that one charge count. Chief, she turned to Lieutenant Chin. Open a channel to the fleet, all ships. The communications officer worked his controls. Channel open. Commander. Elena took a breath, choosing her words carefully. These would likely be the last orders she ever gave. This is Vasquez. In 60 seconds we engage the enemy. Our objective is simple: cause maximum damage to their forward elements and create chaos in their formation. We're not trying to win this battle. We're buying time for New Harvest and the other colonies to evacuate their populations. Every minute we keep this fleet occupied is another transport full of families reaching safety. She paused, looking at the faces Of her bridge crew, young Chin at tactical, barely 25 years old, with a sister waiting on new harvest, Morrison. In engineering, who had 3 grandchildren in the colonies, Ramos at weapons, whose wife was a teacher on Terra Renova. They all had reasons to run, to choose life over this desperate last stand, and they had all chosen to stay. We're about to do something that will seem insane to anyone who wasn't here to understand why. We're going to charge straight into the center of their fleet. We're going to hurt them badly, enough that they'll remember this day. And when we're gone, the galaxy will know that humanity doesn't abandon its own. No retreat, no surrender for the colonies, for every human who ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of a better future. The responses came back immediately, voices from 19 different ships speaking as one. For the colonies, for no retreat. Alina felt something break open inside her chest, a fierce pride mixed with terrible grief. She was leading these people to their deaths. She knew it with absolute certainty, and yet in this moment she had never been more sure that she was making the right choice. Some things were worth dying for: the protection of the innocent, the defense of those who could not defend themselves, the principle that humanity's word meant something, that their oaths were not just pretty sounds, but sacred promises written in blood and steel. Helm ahead, full, she commanded. All ships attack formation Delta 7. We punch through their center and don't stop until they've torn us apart. Indomitable leaped forward like a hunting cat released from a cage. Her engines flared brilliant white, pushing the massive Dreadnought to speeds that made her whole groan with stress. Around her, the 19 ships of the 7th Fleet matched her acceleration, forming a wedge with the Indomitable at its tip. It was a formation designed for breaking through enemy lines, a spearhead meant to pierce and shatter. The Zitherans recognized the attack for what it was. Their formation rippled as the hive mind processed this unexpected behavior. Prey did not charge predators, wounded creatures did not attack superior forces. The tactical decision made no sense according to their calculations. But the humans were coming anyway, their ships blazing across space in a formation that spoke of desperate courage and absolute commitment. The first missiles launched from the Indomitable's tubes, conventional warheads streaking across the void. 7th Fleet followed suit, every ship unleashing what remained of their ordnance. 300 missiles turned space into a field of fire and fury. The Zitharan point defense systems engaged by weapons spitting streams of accelerated matter that detonated warheads in brilliant flashes, but some missiles got through, impacting against hardened hulls, tearing into biohips. With chemical fury, railgun range. Chin announced targets locked, fire everything. Alina ordered. The Indomitable main battery spoke with voices of thunder. Magnetic accelerators hurled tungsten penetrators at fractional light speed, projectiles that carried enough kinetic energy to shatter mountains. The shots crossed the distance in heartbeats, punching through Zitharan shields and armor. A heavy cruiser took 3 hits to its central mass and broke apart in a cascade of atmosphere and debris. A destroyer vanished in a fireball as a lucky shot penetrated its reactor containment, but the Zitharans were firing back. Plasma lances reached out from 100 ships, coherent streams of stellar matter, hot enough to melt whole plating like wax. The indomitable shields flared brilliant, blue absorbing hit after hit. Warning. Alarms screamed across the bridge as energy levels spiked. The Dreadnought shuddered under the barrage, her armor sublimating into vapor, her structure stressed beyond design limits. Shield generators failing, Morrison reported. From engineering, sections 7 through 12 are offline, rerouting power from life support to compensate. The fleet was taking terrible punishment. Alina watched on the tactical display as the destroyer Valiant took a direct hit from a plasma lance. The ship simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant. The cruiser Defiant lost her engines and began tumbling through space, still firing her remaining weapons even as she spun helplessly. The heavy destroyer Thunderchild rammed a Zitharan cruiser, both ships exploding in a fusion reaction that briefly outshone the nearby stars, but they were doing damage, real, substantial damage. The 7th Fleet had smashed into the Zitharan formation like a hammer into glass, and the enemy's perfect synchronization was breaking apart. Ships collided as the hive mind struggled to coordinate evasive maneuvers, communication links overloaded with damage reports. Humans had created chaos where there had been order. Commander were through there. Front line, Chin reported, his voice carried amazement that any of them were still alive. We've lost 9 ships. Remaining vessels are heavily damaged, but still combat capable. Keep firing. Alina commanded. Don't give them time to reform. The indomitable rail guns continued their deadly work, firing until the barrels glowed red-hot from continuous use. Ramos was routing power from damaged systems, pushing weapons beyond their design limits. Every shot counted now. Every hit was bought with the blood of ships and crews. Then something unexpected happened. The long-range sensors detected new contacts. Jumping into the system, Chen's hands flew across his console, his eyes widening. Commander, we have new arrivals, multiple jump signatures, identities confirming as he paused. Disbelief in his voice. Calarian Independence Fleet, 27 ships there hailing us. The main screen shifted to show an alien face. The Calarians were a reptilian species, their scales ranging from deep green to brilliant gold. They had been neutral in the human Zitharan conflict, maintaining profitable trade relations with both sides. This carrier wore military decorations across his chest, and his golden eyes held fierce determination. Human Commander Vasquez, the Calarian said in accented but clear standard language, I am battle leader. Crush of the Calarian 3rd Squadron. We have monitored your engagement. We have seen your courage. The way he pronounced the word courage carried weight as if it were something sacred. My government has declared neutrality in your war. This is true, but I am not my government, and there are some things that matter more than political convenience. Alina felt hope surge in her chest, unexpected and almost painful. Battle leader crush, she began, but the Calarian cut her off with a raised claw. We watched you charge 200 ships to protect colonies you could have abandoned. We watched you choose death over dishonor. The Calarians have a saying, true warriors are known not by their victories but by what they are willing to die for. He bared his teeth in what might have been a smile. My ships are at your disposal, Commander. Let us show the Zithurians what happens when they mistake mercy for weakness. The Calarian fleet drove into the Zither formation from an unexpected angle, their weapons tearing into ships, already damaged by the human assault. The battle transformed in an instant. What had been an execution became genuine fight, the hive mind so perfectly coordinated when executing its own plans struggled to adapt to this new variable. More contacts, Chin reported, his voice rising with excitement. Then war carriers, 4 of them, Telesasian cruiser squadrons. 6 ships, they're all joining the engagement on our side. Alina watched in amazement as ship after ship jumped into the system. Species that had remained neutral, that had watched from the sidelines as the war ground on, were suddenly entering the fight, not because of treaties or political calculations, but because they had watched 20 human ships charge 200 vessels and seen something that moved them. They had seen courage that transcended species and politics. They had seen beings willing to die for principles that mattered. Tide of battle shifted. The Zitharan fleet, so overwhelming in its power moments before, now found itself outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The hive mind attempted to reorganize to bring its superior coordination to bear, but the chaos was too great. Ships were damaged and dying faster than the collective intelligence could adapt. For the first time in the war, the Zitharans broke their fleet, scattered ships jumping to safety in random directions, abandoning their coordinated formation for individual survival. Commander, we've done it, Chin said, wonder in his voice. They're retreating. Alina collapsed into her command chair, suddenly aware of how much the last hour had cost her. Her ship was dying around her. Damage reports scrolled across every screen, but they had held the line. They had bought time for the evacuation, and somehow, impossibly, they had survived. The communications channels filled with voices. Battle leader crushed, congratulating them on a victory well earned. Then commanders offering medical assistance. Tell Asasian captains asking about coordinated patrol schedules. The galaxy had seen humanity refuse to abandon its principles, and something had changed. Alliances were forming, not from political necessity, but from respect, from recognition of shared values that transcended species boundaries. Chief Morrison appeared on the screen, her face exhausted but smiling. Commander, we're not going to make it much further, but we made it far enough. Engineering reports successful. We protected what mattered. Alina nodded, tears she had held back for hours finally falling. She thought about her father, about his guilt and his final words. Someone should have stayed. Today someone had. Today humanity had drawn a line in the stars and refused to retreat. And the galaxy would never forget it. New Harvest reported all evacuations complete 6 hours later. 800,000 souls saved because 20 ships had refused to run. The battle would be remembered as the turning point, the moment when humanity's true strength became clear to the galaxy. Not their weapons or their tactics, but their absolute unwillingness to abandon those they had sworn to protect. The Indomitable limped back to port 3 weeks later, held together by emergency repairs and sheer stubborn determination. Commander Alina Vasquez stood on the bridge one last time before the decommissioning, looking at the stars that held both terror and promise. They had paid a terrible price. 11 ships lost, 3,000 crew members who would never go home. But they had shown the galaxy what humanity meant when they made a promise, And in the darkness, between stars, that light would never fade. The end.